painting to photography, from beadwork to woodworking. KQAL FM on the campus of Winona State University presents Artbeat. Artbeat highlights the work and accomplishments of local artists from in and around Winona. Support for Artbeat is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
Welcome back to Artbeat. Today we have a very exciting episode featuring one of the two directors of Marquee Town, Joe Beyer. Marquee Town showed at Winona's very own Frozen River Film Festival. Directors Joe Beyer and Jordan Anderson were inspired by their love of movie theaters and Bernie Rosendal's dream to refurbish the historic Nordic Theater in Marquette, Michigan. Marquee Town takes the viewer on a journey through the highs and lows of the movie theater industry, as well as offering a touching dose of nostalgia. I'm Lucy Severson, and join me as we dive into the history of the Nordic Theater and other movie theaters of its time. I am here today with Joe Beyer from Marquee Town. How are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. I'm super excited to get into this interview and talk to you more about Marquee Town. So one of my first questions about the film is, where did you get the idea for this?
Sure, and thank you so much for watching it. That's very kind of you. Yeah. So this was a story that actually started as a magazine article. I had gone up to the Upper Peninsula in Michigan to a really cool event called the Fresh Coast Film Festival. And right in downtown Marquette, which is this very kind of small mining town with a lot of history, there were two movie theaters at one time. And I heard that a local teenager had been trying to restore this movie theater from his youth. And so I found his project online and I reached out to him. I have a background in the film business, and I thought it was a really great crusade, and I wanted to help him. And I think a lot of people were contacting him and offering the same kind of help. And I just kept following the story over the next couple years as he struggled to raise the money, as time, was working against him. And the story didn't end the way that everyone hopes it would, and I thought that was interesting. So a couple years later, I mentioned this to my good friend Jordan Anderson, and he's a storyteller, and I said I was thinking about writing this article, and he really convinced me to consider making a film about it because it was such a visual story. It's about a kid who falls in love with this amazing piece of architecture, and then he's trying to, bring it back to life. And so Jordan thought that visually we could really kind of introduce the audience to the same love that the lead character, Bernie Rosendal, feels about this place. And so that's kind of how it started. And we thought it would be a short film, and it turned into a 2-year feature documentary. It was the first time that he and I had ever made something of this, length and complexity. And it would have been easier if I had written that article. Because it really became a full-time job for, the next couple years. But we've loved doing it, and that's how it started, was just being curious about this kid's story to save a movie theater.
Yeah, and is this your first film then?
Well, Jordan and I come from kind of different backgrounds. So I used to work for film festivals for a great deal of my career, and then I wrote for television for a little while. And Jordan's been a storyteller, mainly working in advertising. And so we had made short films and had done a couple things together, but neither one of us had ever made a feature film. And it's not for the weak of heart, I can tell you that.
I can imagine. Would you say there were ups and downs in the process?
Oh, ups and downs doesn't even, begin to describe it. We were trying to make a documentary about a story that had taken place in the past. Mm-hmm. Usually filmmakers who are making a documentary are following a story, and the story is happening and they're capturing it. And that would have been so much easier, but we had to find some kind of way to bring people back without having access even to some of the characters in the story. You know, some of the people had passed away and they weren't available to interview. And so that forced us to get really creative. It was also really frustrating. There were many times after we had been filming for months and months, you know, trying to piece this puzzle together, where we weren't sure at all if anybody would ever, you know, care about this or watch it for more than a few minutes. You know, when you say lows, you know, there were many, many lows where, you know, having not done this before, we made a lot of mistakes. We learned a lot, but we just kept at it until we really decided that we weren't going to make it like another documentary, that we were just going to throw all the rules out. We were going to put all the creative tools on the table and see what happened. And that created a film. You know, it was a real movie all of a sudden, where before it was just hours and hours of footage that we were trying to understand.
I noticed as I was watching it, you have a lot of archival footage.
We did end up with a lot of archival, and it was really hard to chase it all down. It took, you know, many, many, many months. But, you know, we were making multiple trips to Marquette from Traverse City, Michigan, where we live and work. So it's about a 5-hour drive each way. And going to the public library, going to the Marquette Regional History Center. There's a fantastic archivist there named Jack Dio, who had hundreds of years of old photographs and clippings, and he actually found us the only footage that we think exists in, you know, film of this movie theater. And it was from the early days of the movie theater, and it's like 10 seconds, you know, it's just enough to make you, you know, even more curious. But yes, archival was like a huge and fun part of the process. And if you love research and being highly organized, you know, once you have thousands of pieces of potential history at your disposal, you know, going back through it and then finding the parts that mean something to the story was a really big challenge. And I think it's probably the biggest challenge for documentary filmmakers is, you know, you have so much. Think about today, you know, with social media and online video and, you know, just all the things that didn't exist before that capture things and record them. If you're doing a documentary or any type of true story, you could find, you know, thousands of things that might relate to it. And sifting through it is part of the challenge, I think. And in the end, we got so lucky because so many of the places donated that archival footage to us when we told them what the project was about and why we were making it. So we got some real indie love from a lot of cool places that allowed us to use that footage.
That's really great. They must have loved the movie theater in the same way.
Yeah, I you know what? If you can bear it, I'll tell you about one person because it's a really cool story. The first person that gave us footage for the project was actually the son of Orson Welles' last cinematographer, a guy named Gary Graver, who's really well known in, you know, the kind of cult indie film world because he was the last guy that stuck behind Orson Welles and kept making movies with him. And he just happened to take footage in the 90s of all of these movie theaters closing all across the country. And he made a short film about it. And I reached out to his son and I said, hey, this footage, you know, would be really, really meaningful in this project. Is there any possible way I could talk to you about using it? And right away, he wrote back and he said, you're more than welcome to use it. My dad would have loved, you know, the story. And so, you know, the first thing that happened in the documentary was we got footage from Orson Welles' cinematographer for free. So that was the kind of luck that we, you know, ended up getting, you know, more than our fair share a couple times while we were making it.
Wow, that was definitely new information for me. That's incredible.
Yeah, we've never talked about it because it happened at the beginning and people have never asked. They always ask about Bernie and his story, and that's exactly what we love talking about too. But you had asked about archival, and I've just never had a chance to tell that story. But yeah, it was a really amazing day when I got to come into the office and tell Jordan about that email. And also he's seen the movie and he likes the movie, and so that means a lot to us too.
That's really cool. So it's reached a very wide audience.
Well, I sent him a link, so let's be honest. He didn't pull it up on Netflix, but of course, when we were done, I made sure that he had a copy. But yeah, I don't know how many people have seen Marquee Town now. We tried to estimate. We took the movie on tour for a year on our own. We ended up donating all of the ticket sales back to the theaters and the host venues that we went to try and do our small part in the spirit of the movie. And, I know that we had over 3,000 people that saw it, in real life, which is really, special for a small independent film through our film festivals and independent theaters that hosted us. And since it's been online, I've kind of, I guess, stopped worrying about if people are watching it because I guess I know it's out there. And, if people think the story sounds cool or interesting or they want to see what a $50,000 documentary looks like, I hope they'll check it out. But I don't think about it as much anymore, I guess, now that the tour is over.
I was going to ask, how many film festivals did you submit it to?
Well, that's a really interesting question for anybody out there thinking about their own, film festival experience. So when we started, we knew that it would be a small movie, and we had no belief that, we were going to get a deal or anything. We were just trying to finish it. So we kind of thought film festivals would be the perfect way for us to take the film out there and, kind of get it seen. And we wanted people to talk about movie theaters and talk about places that they think are worth saving and why. And so we actually applied to over 100 film festivals. We spent about $3,000 of our $50,000 budget doing that. So that was a significant percentage. And we ended up with about a 14% success rate. So that meant that we got into about 15 film festivals out of that 100. And I was surprised. I'm not going to, hide my disappointment. But there were tens of thousands of films that submitted, to Sundance, and I worked there for many years, so I know what it's like from the inside of the madness. But as a first-time filmmaker, I really hung all my hopes on film festivals. And the ones that we got into, by the way, were amazing and lovely, and we had incredible time. And we had just thought that there were other places that we want to tell this story because we thought people really enjoyed talking about this issue. So we ended up, spending a lot of time on the film festival side of our distribution. And in the end, we ended up just taking our distribution back and doing it ourselves. And once we started doing that, we actually had, I think, the best results for our screenings and media and things that were connected not to the film festivals, but actually the stuff that we made happen on our own because we had to.
And what was your favorite part about the Frozen River Film Festival?
Well, so I have never been there in person, I'm sad to say. I would like to correct that and come back maybe in a year or two. But I heard about it from my really good friend, Aaron Peterson, who is one of the founders of the Fresh Coast Film Festival in Marquette. And he's been there several times with short films that he made. So when I asked him for some advice about cool places where people would have authentic experiences, that were kind of in the same spirit of the movie, he immediately suggested it. And so we were thrilled when we got the invitation.
Yeah, that's really great. I always like to ask that question just to see how people hear about it, because Winona doesn't get like too much attention.
No, it really was on a short list that Aaron Peterson slid over to me and said, you should check these places out. And I was glad. Really the most thing that I saw with the film festivals was that there are still so many of them, like you guys and like Fresh Coast and some of the other ones that we found, that are just like, they're such a great part of the community. And the filmmakers that do end up getting to go there, it's off the beaten path. It's unexpected, and it's really refreshing, And we, we've screened this movie, like, we were not screening this movie, at, the Dolby in Los Angeles. We were screening it in, small historic theaters, in libraries, sometimes in bars, in cultural centers. We did play a couple multiplexes and traditional theaters, but for the most part, we were showing this movie kind of in more weird and unexpected places. And it seemed like the memories and the experiences that people had were better, because of it. And I love that. So, yeah.
I was about to ask, considering your audience, what do you hope people take from this movie?
Well, it's pretty simple. The movie's about one person who took a shot at trying to do something that didn't make much sense, but it was because he loved something and cared about it. And that guy's Bernie. And everyone who sees the movie is inspired by Bernie. We've heard people leave the theater and say stuff like, man, I got to pull a Bernie in my life, or I'm gonna set a Bernie meeting for this thing or that thing. And the fact that he and his story of just being selfless, trying to do something for his community, trying to do something that he cared about, I think it doesn't matter that it was a movie theater. It could be anything. And so if that inspires people, that would be awesome. And I know it has. So that makes us, super proud.
Absolutely. And it for me personally, it inspires me to want to uncover more about the history of these kinds of places.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you could do a Marquee Town movie about just, almost about any movie theater of that era. They've all lived through the booms and the busts of the movie business, the ups and downs of downtowns, small towns. And so when you go digging, you're going to find all of the characters in the story with every theater, I think. And a lot of it is similar in some ways to what happens in Marquee Town, because these themes repeat, over and over again. And, doing a movie and digging as deep as we did into one theater story, we went so detailed into the story of the Nordic, but it was to make a story about any place, and I hope that happens. I hope that people who know these movie theaters or know something about Marquette are fascinated by it. I hope people who know nothing about it are equally, just kind of intrigued, and they're like, holy cow,
Yeah.
this is like a crazy story. And, but those crazy stories are all around us, just waiting to be discovered.
Did you have a favorite piece of history that you uncovered throughout your process?
Yes, you're asking all the cool questions.
Thanks.
It gives me a chance to tell a quick story, which is one of the absolute, biggest moments in Michigan film history was in 1958 when Anatomy of a Murder was filmed in Marquette. Michigan. It was the first Hollywood film that had ever filmed entirely on location. And it was directed by Otto Preminger, who was, at the time, like the Francis Ford Coppola of his age, just a giant filmmaker. So we found out through some of the archives that we found that he was staying while he was filming Anatomy of a Murder at the Landmark Hotel in Marquette. And at night, in the evenings, he would go to the Nordic Theater, and they had arranged to use the theater after hours so that he could watch the dailies, the rushes, that they would print from that day's filming. And it's one of the fastest edits of any movie, and it was because every night he was sitting in the Nordic watching his dailies and making decisions with his editors, and that was not known to anyone, I don't think, before we did that research and uncovered it. But it was verified in multiple places that that's part of the reason why Anatomy of a Murder, it came out just like a month or two after it finished filming and was a huge sensation, is still a sensation. And he was sitting there in the Nordic the whole time watching and creating it in his own mind. So as a filmmaker, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. So when we were making the project, we were in the building that once was big. And upstairs there's a balcony, and we think that's where he watched the dailies. And so just to be there, just to think that happened there was really cool.
Yeah, and that's totally information that people wouldn't otherwise know.
No, there used to be a plaque on the sidewalk outside the Nordic that said it was the site of the premiere of Anatomy of a Murder, because they had shown the film before it had a big splashy Hollywood premiere. They had shown it for all the hundreds of local people that had been involved in making it. And that was at the insistence of Otto Preminger, because he wanted to thank everyone who had been a part of the movie. So technically the world premiere of Anatomy of a Murder took place, part of it in the Nordic. They showed it in nearby Ishpeming, and then they ran the reels to another sold-out crowd at the Nordic. So it's a pretty cool history, and if you haven't seen that film, you definitely need to see it, because if you loved Anatomy of a Fall, which was an incredible film of years, that was a huge amount of tribute to Anatomy of a Murder in many, many ways. So it's all very interesting to me.
This is great to know. I'm a film major, so this is major for me.
Cool. It's cool. I mean, you can't get better than that story, I don't think.
It really hit home for me, this movie, because my first job was at a movie theater. Like, it's just, it's certainly a magical place.
You said that, and I was like, I couldn't believe it. So many of the people that we interviewed got their first jobs at those movie theaters, like so many teenagers of that era. Mm-hmm. It was the perfect teenage job. And we had so many stories from people, these movie theaters were right across the street from each other for a short amount of time. And staff between out into the street, meet in the middle, gossip, go back to their movie theaters, and people, just have such fond memories of the experiences. They can tell you the movies they watched, who they were with. We heard stories from people who, had their first date in the Nordic and then were married for 50 years, and remember the movie and everything that happened that night. And, that part of the movie theater experience, I think, is sadly kind of gone. People have so many choices that those really strong memories that those of us like me grew up, seeing our first movies, standing in line at some of those old movie theaters. That's just an experience that has changed. And so I think for people that remember it, the film lets them kind of go back and, relive some of those those memories. Because, working at a movie theater, going to a movie theater on the regular, there's something about it.
Oh, yeah.
And people love those places. They love them. And that made getting people to talk about it really easy.
I can imagine. That being said, how did you find being able to find people to interview for the film? How was that process?
Well, we started with people that had worked with Bernie. All of came through Bernie. All the natural people in the story that had become a part of his quest to save the movie theater. We tracked them all down one by one. It took some time, I think, and rightfully so, for us to establish trust with people and, that we were going to faithfully try and retell this story, and we had good intentions. And then once we started with a few people, I think, Marquette is a small town, and people heard what we were up to, and we started hearing people who stepped forward and said, oh, you should call so-and-so, or here's an email of a guy who works there. And he, so it was that process, and I would call people and introduce myself and tell them what we were up to. And sometimes I would just collect more research, for the archives. Some people didn't want to be in a documentary, but they were happy to hear their story. And, one by one, as we understood what had happened to the Nordic, then we reached out to all the people we thought could speak to that and invited them. So it just became a process. At one point, we wanted to make sure that we hadn't left any stone unturned, with anybody out there that might have some information. So we did do a bunch of social media posts asking for people to reach out to us if they had some photos, if they had stories, and we did get a few from that too. So was process. These people are genuinely friends now. It feels like a family that came out of this weird documentary. So we're in touch with everybody that is in the movie, and see them when we go back to Marquette, or Bernie has come to several screenings with us. So it's really some documentaries are kind of hit jobs that are stories about people they don't want out there, or really ugly truths. I think this was the exact opposite, and so I'm very glad about that. We weren't investigative journalists; we were people who loved Bernie's story, and we wanted to tell it in a way that reflected that respect.
Yeah, it sounds like it was very community oriented.
For sure. And, once people got a chance to see the movie, including Bernie, we had offered Bernie a chance, obviously, because it's his story. We offered him a chance to look at the rough cuts. They were very, very rough, and we just thought, he might want to take a look at what we were doing, and he never took us up on it. And then finally, when the film was finished, I think a family member of his had seen it at one of our film festival experiences or a screening somewhere. And he reached out to us and he said, okay, send me the movie. I'm ready to watch it. And that was a big day, you can imagine, for Jordan and I, feeling pretty nervous.
Yeah.
Not only because he was watching it, but frankly because it was finished. There wasn't any chance to make any changes at that point. And he texted us, Bernie did, right away, and gave us the highest compliment he could have asked for, which is, he said, I can't believe how you did it, but he said, you've told it exactly the way it happened. And, that was complicated.
Yeah.
To say the least, it was a complicated story. And so for Bernie to say, you guys told it and it's exactly the way it happened, Jordan and I were feeling so relieved and over the moon, happy, and that was it. And so, now we joke Bernie has a lifelong passion for movie theaters, and he may want to try and bring one back to life or start a new one or something like that. So Jordan said we always have to be ready for a potential sequel.
I was going to say, my next question was, what's next for both of you?
Well, that one's just always there.
Yeah.
It depends on what Bernie's up to. No, I would say very honestly, you asked about the highs and lows. It was such a extreme life experience for both of us doing this that, we're still in it and taking just a little bit of time to decide what to do next.
Yeah.
But I think that there's another story that we'd really like to tell, the two of us, and that's so important, as collaborators. I got so lucky that Jordan fell in love with Bernie's story the same way that I did, so that it was equally ours, together, making every decision together. And we do have an idea together, I think, that we'd love to start working on. We just have to clear the next 2 to 3 years of our schedule. We know now what it takes.
Exactly, yeah. And now you have the first one under your belt.
I will say, getting that first one under your belt, all you filmmakers out there, or makers or creators, whatever it is, the first novel, the first song, the first album, the first film, the first whatever, it's so good to get that one under your belt and to move on, because it's so exciting to learn all this stuff and so that next time, there are so many things that we would love to do better, with this experience that we've gained.
What advice would you have for people who want to make their first film?
Well, people say a lot of things about this. One may have a different answer. I really feel like freedom that we had to make this documentary the way that we wanted to make it was also because we really did not spend a lot of money. We raised some money and we budgeted it, and we were very disciplined, extraordinarily to pay ourselves. This is not the way to do it, but if you're going to take a risk and devote a lot of time to something you care about or something you're passionate about, what I learned was it's really a lot easier to save $1 than it is to raise another $1, at least how we were doing it. And so that meant that trying to be more creative with less money became kind of our superpower, because in the end, we had to distribute the movie ourselves. We still had the resources to do it. We had a plan, and it felt good to know that we weren't putting anything at risk either. That nobody was going to lose their house, or, we didn't put our savings into it. And I think it's just smart. I think it's just prudent. It's extraordinarily difficult to break even on an indie film, even if you do get distribution, and I can tell you this, from a lot of experience with that side of things. And so with an independent project, it's kind of a superpower. The less you make it for, the more freedom you have, and ultimately the less risk. And I think that that's a really good combination for today's, for what is very different today, and that might sound old, that kind of advice. I'm just thinking about that because it's like putting it out there is so easy for people now. I don't know. Maybe they don't even, maybe the idea of having to raise money is old fashioned, I guess. It could be.
I mean, I don't know myself, but it sounds like good advice to me, because it was impressive how you guys were able to put this film together on the budget that you had.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate that. We had so many favors so many people, that helped us along the way with huge things. But it was also, it was just a big, fun collaboration. And, and that spirit really carried us through and helped us finish it and helped us get it out there. And I think I was thinking that sounded old-fashioned because I guess for someone like you, there is no barrier to getting your work. And if you make something, you can put it out, in a million different places right now. And I grew up at a time where I still have the mentality somehow that there's keepers out there that decide what people get to see. But it's just not that way anymore.
Absolutely. It's certainly easier than it ever has been to share stuff with the world and to try and get it out there and get your name heard and everything.
Yeah, and, we just finished the tour that we put together. It was like 36 cities. It was a year, and it was awesome, and it took a ton. And at the end of that, we wanted to make sure that the film would be out digitally, so we got this great partnership with Detroit PBS, and all the PBS affiliates around Michigan put it on their stations, and then it went online to 100 PBS affiliates across the country, way bigger than we ever thought when we started. And we really, if we were broke, we needed money to create DCPs for festivals and theaters, and we needed promotional money to finish all of our clearances and, make sure that all of the music rights were buttoned up so that we could take advantage of that kind of stuff. And there were so many times when we could have spent a lot of money trying to solve a problem, but I think we just didn't have it. And so we just had to come up with different ideas. But in the end, we still had money when we were finished so that we could make sure that all that hard work wasn't just sitting on a shelf somewhere, but that people actually had a chance to experience it,
For sure.
Yeah, and I think that was something that we learned. So I would offer that as some advice.
Perfect. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me and talking all about Marquee Town.
Oh my gosh, thanks for asking me such interesting questions. I really appreciate it, and thanks for watching the movie.
Of course. I had such a blast watching it because, as you know, I feel very strongly the same way that movie theaters should be saved.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to see the movie, it's free online. You can watch there's no ads. That was really important to me. So you don't have to sit through a bunch of annoying ads. And, go pull a Bernie in your life.
Yes, you've heard it here, everyone. Go pull a Bernie. I think I might myself.
Well, be sure you tell me how it goes.
I absolutely will. And thank you again so much for a wonderful interview.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thanks again to Joe Byer for joining us on this episode of Artbeat. If you're interested in viewing the film, Marquee Town is free online to stream. For more conversations on art, tune in to Artbeat, Tuesdays at 12:30, right here on 89.5 KQAL.
Artbeat is written and produced by KQAL FM on the campus of Winona State University. Visit us on the web at kqal.org.